And here it is.
Yeah.
And it's sort of this, oh my God, don't go outside. It's raining. Like it's only go out for what you absolutely need. Otherwise, stay indoors. I mean,
Oh,
it's
that's
great. It's,
funny.
we're
That's
just so
funny.
spoiled. It's ridiculous. Because even in Florida, right, which is another very warm state, it rains, but it rains all the time.
Mhm.
They're tropical. I mean, so we've got this sort of beautiful sunny weather most of the year, and it only rains if it's, kind of the winter-ish months. We don't really have seasons really down here anyway. It's pretty temperate all year long. So for us, rain is like a huge, stop the presses, it's raining kind of thing versus somewhere
Mhm.
else that has beautiful sun, warm weather, but it rains. It's a tropical place, so they're used to it.
Mhm.
So anyway, we
Mhm.
get especially childish when this when this happens, and we all whine, and it's fine.
It felt like that in Texas too, where that's where I'm
Yeah.
from.
Oh
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
But up
Yeah.
here in the Pacific Northwest, if you couldn't
Rains all
tolerate
the time.
rain, you would never get outside.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What brought you out to the Pacific Northwest from Texas?
Law school. I was looking at law
Oh,
schools, and I looked at a
wow.
couple. I applied to Seattle U, and that I was also just looking for a change too, a
Yes.
change of um a cultural climate, change of actual
Yeah,
climate. The
yeah.
heat was so much for me. I mean, I grew up in
Oh,
the
I bet.
terrible heat, and I just wanted a break. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah. Yeah,
Interesting.
I
We
know.
all have a story.
I
Yep.
know. So speaking of stories, I uh where we were talking last week, and you're kind of weaving together, I felt like we just got kind of the bones of what was going
Yes.
on. And so you had this career, you really found yourself enjoying grief counseling, or
Yes.
teaching grief and loss
Mm.
to
Yes.
counseling students, and you found like that not only did you have a real affinity for the subject matter, but also you learned that you loved the process of teaching.
Yes.
And around this time, you're just sort of getting your stride. You're getting uh, you get these opportunities that you didn't think you were even going to get. Like you said, you were a master's level professor,
Yeah.
and you got this professorship that was a wonderful opportunity. And then you started to notice things in the the social atmosphere,
Yes.
sort of from the students and from
Yes.
faculty, and it
Yes.
went from there. And so we were talking about how you ended up having to take a medical leave and just
Yes.
decided that you were going to resign.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I'd love to hear more about all of that and
Yeah.
what it's been like.
So I did. So I took the medical leave, and it was coming after the worst quarter I had had there. So that was the quarter where, even in my grief classes, the ranking of pain and of whose suffering was worse than somebody else's, you know, um, the issues that happened when I was teaching that addiction course, and
Mhm,
people were more concerned with the color of skin of the person who
mhm,
was giving this TED talk, and the population that she was trying to protect and save, more so than the model, which was completely, and the model really was about the holistic way of treating addiction and of treating people such that, they're not looked at as, you know, disgusting and put into, you loser drug addict kind of a thing, but how do we kind of elevate these people back to a status where we see them as human
mhm,
first,
mhm,
and that they have this really severe, you can call it whatever you want, condition, illness, there's a lot of different ways that people label it, considering what side of the field you're on, but the consensus is that there's a mental health component. That's the one
mhm,
consensus,
mhm,
that does exist. And so here we are having somebody talking about how to do this. I mean, one of the first, changes in how we thought about addiction was from Gabor Mate, and you may have heard
mhm,
of him.
mhm, mhm,
And the main book that we would use for the textbook for that class was In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And that's the one kind of breakout book, the first he had, that talked about addiction being not a condition, or he kind of talked about it being the absence of, gosh, let me see if I can remember his words. Addiction is the absence of connection.
mhm,
Um, and people who are, non-addicted, or what we really need to flourish in the world is connection and connection with ourselves, but really with other people, relationships. And addiction is an absence of that, and that gaping hole is what people kind of continue to feed. So these are novel concepts that are taking this sort of the loser druggy
Mhm.
idea out of the picture
Mhm.
and adding in compassion for what somebody is missing, what part of them is not being fulfilled, and what that gaping hole is. And
Mhm.
really, when we start bringing connection, with other people and with oneself into the picture, people get better. So the
Mhm.
reason I'm kind of straying off on that is just to kind of paint this picture that even in conservative places that aren't as forward thinking as California, or any other Chicago, any other really kind of bluish, I guess, city, or something like that, we're seeing that happen in conservative places that are poverty stricken, where they're talking about, let's look at addiction differently.
Mhm.
Let's not look at this as something that is about somebody who's just a loser, but rather something's happening for them on a medical level, emotional, cognitive level. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle.
It's like a
So having
humanizing of it.
completely,
Mhm.
completely, and that's kind of what the idea was, what Mate was doing. I mean, if you have ever heard any of his videos, he's just boring as can be. I'm not going to deny it, because he has very monotone, but his material, his messaging, and what he writes are really transformative in that field, in that area of study.
Mhm.
So having said all that, when you kind of see that starting to happen in other places, like again, West Virginia, this very poor state where they don't have a lot of savvy, right? Psychological savvy, if you
Mhm.
will, and
Mhm. Okay.
sophistication.
Yeah.
So for them to come out and say, hey, we have this new way of looking at this, and this is saving lives. So again, that was the whole issue, is that those students didn't look at that bigger picture and say, okay, well, here we are now in tandem trying to treat addiction in a humane fashion without calling these people these names, et cetera. And here are other places are starting to do the same thing. Let's listen and learn from each other. It became that person's white and they're trying to save white people,
Mm.
rather than say, hey, which is the point I was making, this is something we've never tried before and it's
Mhm.
working. They
Mhm.
came up with
Mhm.
sort of these response teams, and it ended up to where they were able to reduce overdoses by a significant amount, and actually get people into treatment
Mhm.
after they recovered from the overdose. And that was sort of an unheard of task. I mean, most of the time, especially in places like that, not
Mhm.
necessarily other places, but even here, I mean, if statistically speaking, you have maybe only 5% that will remain sober, over the course of their lives. I mean, 95% of people will eventually die from something that's related to the addiction. And
Mm.
that's after having gone through 7 or 8 or 9 stints in rehab. It is extremely difficult to treat, extremely difficult to
Mhm.
treat.
Mhm.
And that's a whole nother class. And that's,
Mhm.
one of the courses I taught. I know
Mhm.
quite a bit about that area.
Mhm.
And so anyway, I was excited to bring this in. And when the students just berated it
Mhm.
without listening to what a different way could be that we could use here. The whole point is that you adapt it to your community, you adapt
Mhm.
it to
Mhm.
your environment where you live, where you see that certain types of interventions might be more effective than others. You craft it, right? And that's again what psychology and treatment plans are supposed to be about, is crafting, really tailoring treatment to
Mhm.
that person
Mhm.
without this blanket view or this overall kind of, umbrella. And so coming off of that also, that quarter of teaching, when I was teaching that course, I had extremely strong pushback. And again, I had
Okay.
pushback before, but
You mean from the
with that one
students?
quarter from the students.
Okay.
So that one quarter, just kind of everything compiled onto each other.
And what year was that? Was that 2020?
2021,
Oh, 2021. Okay. So here
2021.
you're bringing you bring this TED Talk and you bring this topic up, and it's
Yes,
this complex issue, addiction,
yes,
which as
yes.
counselors, these students are going to be facing over and over. And here's a way for us to look at it that is maybe novel, um, or just something that can help you to expand your awareness around the things that the people that you're going to work with are going to deal with.
Yes,
And
yes.
and you had, was it one student or a number of students that just completely shut down and were not able to even engage with the material because of the presenter being a white person, and they were stopping at that? It was like, judge a book by its cover. We're not even going to open
Yes.
this book. Wrong color.
Yes,
Was it
bingo.
just a student or was it a group of
No,
students?
it was about 4. It
Okay.
was about 4, maybe 5
Okay.
out of a class of 22, I think I had.
Yeah.
Um, that's when it became a little problematic. I mean, you always run into 1 or 2 students in any course or whatever that might push back with something, and I can handle that. I have pretty, I'm pretty confident in what I know, but I'm also humble enough to say when I don't know, if I don't know something, something ask the question in class, I'm not sure my answer, maybe I'm not sure, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
question. Let's look at this together. I never walked in there as the be all end all, but that's one thing. And it's but it's something totally different. Not when you say, oh, gee, I don't know, or I don't agree. That's one thing. But
Mhm.
over here, the problem is there, you're not even willing to be open-minded enough to listen so I can try to make a case for this.
Mhm.
And when you had 1 or 2 students here and there, it wasn't a big deal, but now there's starting to be 3 and 4 and 5 students that
Mhm.
are all pushing back, that are agreeing and kind of, fueling that conversation. You almost wonder if it was in person, would they have had the guts to do that? Was it
Mhm.
because we were on
Oh,
Zoom
yeah,
at
you were
that
on
time,
Zoom. Yeah.
behind the screen, that they have the guts
Yeah.
to write stuff in the chat, they have the guts to say out loud, well, clearly this woman, doesn't care about what happened to Black people in the 80s. And clearly they only care about saving white people,
Mm.
because it's
Mm.
West Virginia, which is like 90 something percent white population. So the it was all just lost on them altogether.
Mhm.
So that was happening at the same time that this other ranking of pain was happening in my grief class. And I guess it was, I ended that quarter very upset, and I ended that quarter just dreading going back. I had to make this kind of case and say, listen, we're not talking about what color of skin this person is. We're talking about addiction, the fact that
Mhm.
it's killing people,
Mhm.
even though, well, no one cares because the opioid crisis is really about white people being killed. It's like, no, there have been opioid, you know, products or what, heroin's an opioid. I mean, that's been killing people for however, I mean, they've been smoking opium for however long they've,
Mhm.
so I'm not a historian, I can't speak on that, but
Yeah.
I definitely know this isn't the only time in our history of drug, issues that we've had to deal with this. And so they kind of broke it off into these camps. And meth is, a very common drug also in lower income poverty stricken areas where there's mostly white people as well,
Mhm.
where it's
Mhm.
cooked and it's made. I mean, that's, crack, has more of a connection to the Black community. That may be the case. Meth has more of a connection to the white community, and I mean, there are plenty of people there, losing their teeth, living on the streets, poverty. I mean, it's so, to attach race, gender, anything to this issue completely negates the humane part of it, which is what
Mhm.
you said at the beginning, is that we're looking at people as human beings. There's a humanity component that's brought into it.
Right.
And all of those other things kind of water down what the real issue is. It doesn't matter whether it's meth or alcohol, which alcohol is the leading addictive substance
Mhm.
anyway,
Mhm.
quite above everything else. Easiest to access, cheapest, all of those things, and most socially acceptable. So it's harder to judge,
Mhm.
obviously,
Mhm.
Anyway, so having said all that, I was just struggling a lot by that point,
Mhm.
um, to really
What
be
was
able
that
to.
like for you to be confronted with that? I mean, what did that first of all, I wanted to ask you about the dynamic in the class, but it's probably harder to really get a sense of that when you're on Zoom. It's not the same as standing in front of a group of people where
Yeah.
you can really look at everybody's expressions and watch their body language and stuff. So it's very different when you're trying to view a Zoom screen. But what was your sense of and I'll say just for context, when I was I wonder what it was like in the classes that I was in. I had sort of a sense of people being silent and then talking to me outside of class, saying that they would agree
Mm,
with points that I had made. When I would push back on certain things, I would get emails or I'd get somebody stopping me in the hall and thanking me. And my feeling was kind of like, well, why didn't you say anything to indicate that you supported what I was trying to, the point I was trying to make?
yes,
The silence was deafening in there, and I felt very
yes,
embarrassed, and it was very hard to speak up alone. But
yes.
in this situation, it's kind of the reverse, where you're having people who are speaking up and trying to push more of the ideology into infuse the teaching with it, or push back against where
Yes.
they're not seeing it. Did you have anybody bring up a balanced view? Were people just completely silent? What was that like, and what was it like for you?
Um, those those 4 or 5 people, I would say, so normally, the video ends and then I don't remember this time. Sometimes I do small breakout rooms so people can talk amongst themselves and then come back to the bigger room. But in this case, we didn't have time, I think, to do that. So I just did a general debrief.
Mhm.
And the people that were the most vocal about being upset and turned off by this, they did not necessarily have the rest of the class jumping on board, but they were the ones that were controlling the conversation and they were
Mm,
controlling the narrative. So
mhm,
anybody that had a differing point of view was silent.
mhm.
So
Okay.
I had to make the classroom safe, and I really kind of hate that word now because of
Yeah.
what that word has turned into. I just can't, I hate it, but whatever.
Yeah.
In this case, I'm going to have to, use
Mhm,
it, but I had to make it an okay place for the other people to jump in and to have a differing point of view. Like I had to stand up for those people in a way, for the
mhm.
quiet ones or the ones that I could see didn't agree. They didn't know what they could say or should say, and it was not comfortable for them. Um, where if you have a classroom setting, it's interesting because on the one hand, the classroom setting would have allowed the people who disagreed with that one group of antagonists, we'll call
Mhm,
them, it would have created more of an atmosphere where if my presence was physically there, they were physically next to other students that maybe didn't agree with them, that they would maybe be a little bit more comfortable to say something.
mhm.
But on the other hand, those antagonists may have not been that direct and that
Yeah, yeah,
antagonistic in person. So
yeah.
those two things
The
were sort
higher
of
level of
occurring.
hostility.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, okay, well, this is where I really was able to see what this one kind of core group, but it's sort of this kind of example, I guess, a microcosm of what's been happening, across the board at Antioch and in general with this, where it's this group of 4 or 5, this
Mhm,
20% that are controlling the narrative and the space and the story for everybody else.
mhm,
So they were very quiet, and I felt I had to defend these other people and say, look, this isn't the point. The point is not about going back to
mhm.
the crack up. So I felt myself anxious and my voice and speaking was just getting very strong and
Mhm,
elevated, and really
mhm.
I was anxious, I was angry, I wanted to flunk the students, I'm not going to
Yeah,
lie, I wanted to not pass them
yeah.
because it started to become to where I, as the professor of these classes, we have to kind of we're trying to regulate the emotional environment in there. We're trying to keep our feet planted into the ground. We're
Mhm,
trying to keep an open mind at the same time. We're trying to see if there's something we've missed or what more we could bring in to enrich this conversation. Sometimes you're just going to have that one class, that one day to say this one really important thing, and you want to make sure that you get it out. They may not hear it from,
mhm,
somebody else down the line. There's just those, for me, my experience of being a professor was like that.
mhm,
And so um, having to kind of manage all the various things that are happening in the classroom and being sort of the absorber, the shock absorber, if you will, that's okay. It's one thing, it's what you sign up for. But when it becomes to where you're being kind of attacked
mhm,
directly,
mhm,
then it's where I'm a human, as is any human. You
mhm,
want to either for me, either retreat and not say anything or fight back and sound
mhm,
defensive
mhm,
rather than approaching it from a, okay, this is great. This is this is a challenge,
mhm,
challenging subject. Let's talk
mhm,
about it further. So I
mhm,
had a really hard time with trying to regulate myself and
mhm,
and be, even keeled, but also creating space for this other. So I felt like I had to protect myself and I had to protect other people who wanted to say something. Whether
mhm.
they agreed or didn't, I wanted them to have a chance to speak.
Well, and
And
it's such an odd experience, I would think, as a professor to have that kind of crosstalk happening like you
yes,
get in Zoom, like they're actually talking about
yes,
you or about the topic,
yes,
which you would
yes,
never hear if you were in a lecture class. You would
yes,
just that's that level of unprofessional behavior wouldn't happen with
yes,
adult learners in a
no,
college setting or or graduate setting here.
yes,
And so they're acting like children and chattering back and forth, and like she doesn't care
Yes,
about this. And uh,
yes,
what an odd thing to be presented with.
yes. It was odd. And it was unusual because I was used to, being well liked, or at least people respecting me. Maybe if they
Mhm,
didn't agree, they respected me. And I
mhm,
felt, I guess, a total lack of respect. And that was, I think, really hard. There was a lack of respect for myself and for their colleagues who were in the class that
mhm,
maybe wanted to say something or wanted to learn something.
mhm.
And addiction's a hard topic in general because the numbers are really low in terms of people that successfully make it through treatment. And treatment is highly effective. It's just, anyway, there's a lot of factors why people don't complete the treatment.
Mhm,
And so you're already dealing with this tough topic where there's not a lot of, you're trying to find glimmers of hope. Okay. You're trying
mhm,
to find, well, then why bother? Why do we bother if it's this bad? So that is already a feat, because if you look at the actual numbers, there's research and science based numbers on who makes it through sobriety, who doesn't. Why are the sobriety rates? Why is it so hard to maintain a clean and sober life, et cetera? You're already dealing with a topic like that. So when you bring this glimmer of hope and you're trying to bring things into the conversation and then that gets shut down, that's
mhm,
for me personally what was really difficult, is that I'm trying to add some hope into a topic that's hard to teach because it feels so hopeless
yeah.
that people are going to make it. And mostly everybody in the class typically has a friend or a family member or somebody they've known that has had some addiction issues. So it's
Mhm,
something that people have a real strong personal connection to, no matter, whether they themselves ever suffered from addiction or not. They
right.
have a close, they've brushed upon it at some point. And so there's already that piece that's going to make it kind of sensitive. So when you're adding all that in, I felt at that point as though I shut down the conversation altogether and completely just, we need to revisit this the following week. And why doesn't everybody kind of sit and think about what's come up for you? And I think we had two more classes left at that point.
Mhm,
But for me, it was okay. Now I'm getting angry and resenting my class, my students,
mhm,
for creating this environment in my classroom where I'm working so hard, to find some interesting things and ways to present this material. So I didn't feel like myself. I felt angry. I
mhm,
felt resentful.
mhm,
I felt like, you know, just who are you to make those? Why are those people's lives less important? And on
mhm,
top of that, I don't agree with the entire way the model was presented because it needs some tweaking in a bigger city, in an urban community, in an area that has different, socioeconomic populations. I may not even work in a community uh, where it's a high socioeconomic population. She was talking about the poverty areas
mhm,
of, of West Virginia. So there was so much to consider. And at the same time, they were missing that entire boat. And I've never been in that position as a professor or as a
mhm,
teacher. I've had people disagree for sure. I've had people have, different, viewpoints, but to have them shut me down and in some way align me with the oppressor, with the white supremacist group, I took a personal offense to it. I did feel like I was being attacked, and I also felt as though I had to protect and save these other students who were
mhm,
also probably feeling attacked.
mhm,
So my ability to emotionally regulate the class as a professor turned personal. It wasn't just about creating,
mhm.
a safe place for all of them. Then it made me unsafe. I mean, I felt uncomfortable and that I was being assaulted verbally. And then all the guy kept thinking is if they go to the administration, I'm going to hear about this.
So
I'm
you
going to
didn't
get an
have a sense
email.
that you could talk to, it seems like
No.
as a professor, if something like that were to happen in your course in, uh, I don't know, I want to call it normal circumstances, but just
Yes.
prior to all these things happening, you would have you'd have somebody that you could go to, like a
Yes.
supervisor or something, the chair, and be able to say, hey, I'm having these issues in my class. These students are pretty hostile to the teaching. What do you have some guidance on how but
No.
this was the opposite. You felt like they were more aligned with
Yes. They
this.
were more aligned,
Okay.
and I did not feel I could trust my colleagues. I couldn't
Mhm,
trust my supervisor. I couldn't trust my colleagues.
mhm,
And because I couldn't trust them, I couldn't say exactly what was on my mind. I knew I was going to be
mhm,
swimming through this, sort of, abyss all by myself. I wasn't going to get that kind of backing, not
mhm,
because maybe they didn't think that I was right, but because the student is always right. I mean, 9 times out of 10, The student is right. The students who are paying, we're paying good money to be here. The school aligns with the students in 9 out of 10 cases. So it was really easy for you, if you were a student there, to go up the ranks and complain. And if you're complaining about the right thing, if you're
Mhm.
complaining that the class is, geared toward the heteronormative, whatever, fill in the blank,
Mhm.
that you're more likely to win that case than the
Mhm.
opposite way, than to say, hey, my teacher totally dismissed me because I'm white and I have, something to say. They're going to say, why don't you sit and take a look at your white privilege and go home and look at yourself in the mirror and write
Mhm.
down all the ways in which, so I
Well,
didn't feel like I
yeah,
could.
that's what happened to me when I spoke out at my school. It was that same thing.
There you
Oh
go.
yeah, yeah. Well, at Antioch, at, the school we're
Yes,
both talking about.
100%.
Yeah.
Go look at yourself,
Mhm.
right? Because you're the one then with the problem
Mhm.
if you
Mhm.
don't see it differently. So,
What a strange shift. I mean, I guess I keep coming back to this idea that you must have had these experiences in, what do we even call it? Like uh, what is this? Pre-ideological takeover teaching in a,
breathe. Yeah.
I keep
Yes.
wanting to use the word normal, but like in a typical, what we would have expected,
Yes.
there was a schema for what it looks
Yes.
like to sit in a classroom, in a graduate class or a college class.
Yes.
And
Yes.
this turns it all on its head. It's just completely distorted.
Yes.
So you lived through that shift,
Yes.
and you were on both sides of it.
Yes.
And I guess I'm really fascinated by that. And one thing I'm really fascinated by is, it would be one thing if all of this were being pushed through the school,
Yes.
through the curriculum or the faculty or whatever. But this is coming from both sides. And like you said,
Yes.
it's a selection bias with bringing in students
Yes.
that agree with these things already. But to
Yes.
have the students pushing the direction, it's an orthodoxy, and it's being pressed
Yes.
on you from both ends.
Yes.
I guess I don't have a question about that as much as just I'm shocked by it, and I'm curious
Yes.
just about your experiences in relation to all that, and how that must have shaken you as a human being going through that.
Yeah. I mean, it shook me in so many ways. I think one of the things was that, I was able to kind of keep this was happening, I think, on a bigger scale, a much bigger scale than I realized, for longer, than what I realized, because I had so much independence there. I had
Mhm.
gone to school there as a student, so I kind of, knew that the professors could kind of bring their own brand of themselves and their own brand of their own, clinical orientation into the class. And that was always, welcomed, because it was something new to be learned. And I remember having that experience as a student where they all had said some different kinds of things, and I took pieces of what professor said in classes and incorporated them. And
Mhm.
some, 25 years later, I can remember some of the things that some of the professors shared that were like nuggets
Mhm.
that stood with me throughout my
Mhm.
whole career. So that's what I was assuming that this was going to be for them too. They're going to hear lots of different perspectives, and they will take some nuggets, maybe from me one day, maybe from somebody else, whatever, and go on. And
Mhm.
that was okay then to bring in a different, conversation into the classroom. So it did shake me, because this was happening before I really realized it was happening, that this different, shift in, I don't know, wokeology. I know it's such a cliche word now, actually, but in this kind of, social justice minded lens, this was happening before I really realized it, I think. And
Mhm.
what shook me was that by the time I realized it, it was very bad, and
Yeah.
it was 10 times worse than I thought it was. And I noticed myself, and I think I mentioned this the last time that we talked, that I ended up admitting people into the school I didn't think were going to be good for the field, but I did it because they answered the social justice question correctly on the interview. And the
Mhm.
pressure that there was to make sure we had certain amount of men
Mhm.
of color, certain amount of women of color. I
Mhm.
had to push. I mean, I had a student that they wanted to accept who was living in another country. She didn't understand English at all, zero, and she was using the school as a way to kind of enter the country.
Oh
She didn't
wow.
have any understanding of, just basic principles of just even the English language, which,
Hmm.
okay, that's fine, but our program is taught in English, so there's nothing I can do
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
And she clearly stated, well, I want to attend this school. Whichever school is going to accept me in the United States, that's what's going to allow me to get there. So
Mhm.
whether it's you or someone else. And she said it directly in those words. And
Mhm.
I said, we can't accept her. So I kick it back and say, no,
Mhm.
this discussion goes around with the, kind of the core faculty. So the people on top of the program
Mhm.
about why is the student getting rejected? Why is the student not, why isn't she being accepted? She's I think an all cash pay, I want to say student.
Mhm.
Why? And I had to say, listen, I get it about the diversity thing, but she can't even speak the language and she cannot understand. She's not choosing Antioch because it's Antioch. This is what you guys want, right?
Mhm.
This conversation went round and round and round. And I said, I absolutely stand against it. It was the one time I took a stand to say no.
Mhm.
And the that wasn't enough. I had to continue to put, and that's kind of also what showed that they didn't care about
Mhm.
all of that. They just
Mhm.
were willing to be able to say they had the student from Pakistan or whatever country she was coming from, and
Mhm.
she didn't even have any. And when we asked her, "Are you willing to learn about these new things?" She said, "No, I'm coming in knowing how to be a counselor." Well,
Mhm.
that's not what Antioch wants or any school.
Right.
But the push, because she would meet the demographic
Yeah, she made them look
that they
better for
want.
diversity.
Absolutely. And the fact that I was accepting students myself
Mhm.
because they happen to have, okay, there was a Black man, I'm just going to say, who was, had played a sport in the past and it didn't work out for him, decided to make a career change. And the interview with him was terrible, but he answered what they wanted to hear with the social justice thing. So I
Mhm.
pushed him through. And
Mhm.
I did not, I had some sleepless nights over that going, okay, Christine, now you're now so for me to so vehemently hate this stuff,
Mhm.
and be disgusted by
Mhm.
it, for me to be able though to be impacted in
Mhm.
a way that I ended up kind of aligning with
Mhm.
it out of, I don't know, just social pressure of the
Mhm.
school, the incoming messages, and me drinking the Kool-Aid. I think I
It
used to
just
choked on the
Yeah.
Kool-Aid
Yeah.
last time.
Yeah, you did.
That was bothersome, and that's what was happening to me, and
It
I think
speaks
that
to how insidious it is
it is
because
very insidious. You
even
don't know. Mhm.
you're resisting it, and even in your resistance, you're still experiencing it and in some ways forwarding it,
Yes,
even though
forwarding it
you don't want to.
100%.
And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, just how serious this really
Yes,
is and how this is really going to remake what we
yes,
think of our society as.
yes. It's gonna remake what we think of it's even a broader, because it is so much broader than just the world of mental health. I mean, they talk about how did people just kind of accept, the sort of the communism,
Mhm.
Nazism, if you
Mhm.
will. And again, I'm not a historian, so I don't want to use big words I don't know, but
Mhm.
that whole
Yeah.
concept,
Yeah.
you can start to see how that happens on the smaller level. I'm not
Mhm.
comparing this to that, but what I'm saying is it's easy to get sucked in because little by little, if you get enough of that messaging, then
Mhm.
you start to have people that you actually respect and admire, or maybe look up to as a mentor, giving you the messaging.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
you're starting to see people that are outside of all those groups that are giving you the messaging.
Mhm.
You start to think and take in, either maybe I've missed something and I'm wrong, or I'm just going to repeat it back because it's the rhetoric. And you
Mhm.
repeat it enough times, you start to believe it.
Yeah.
And so there's this push and pull cognitive dissonance. And that final quarter of school is where that cognitive dissonance, where I was kind of
Mhm.
fighting myself internally, is when I decided I couldn't do it. And the big crisis here for me, it's not about Antioch. It's the fact that I wasn't going to be able to teach anywhere ever again in
Mm.
this entire state,
Mm.
period.
Yeah.
Because all of the programs at this point, way more extensively than I knew, had taken that in. So I had to be willing to either kind of align with the narrative a little bit and try where I could to push back.
Mhm.
I had such debilitating levels of anxiety before class, I felt almost paralyzed. So I also had to deal with that kind of component of it,
Mhm.
or give up teaching altogether and it's over. no program right now in psychology would ever accept me to return as a professor because I do not align my
Align
courses
with
with those
that.
tenets. Yes. So that was throwing away not just being a therapist, it was throwing away being a professor and a therapist, being a supervisor, anything that was ever connected to the industry at
Mhm,
all, that was going to be thrown away, which is why there was I had a hard time. I didn't leave sooner because of that, because
mhm. Well, that's a massive sacrifice for your life.
everything.
I mean,
Yes,
that's your career, your life,
everything.
your
Yes.
form
And
and the goals and everything is just
all of it. And I
compromised.
have not found, I've worked at a couple places and done some things, but I haven't found that same level of the purpose, like what gets you out of bed every day, or
Yeah.
the chills that I would get in class sometimes when like
Mhm.
things were working and minds were being opened. I've never been able to experience that doing anything else ever
Right.
since.
Well, and
Not
this
that the
this
you
brings
know
something I wanted. I'm kind of keeping half an eye on the chat, and
yes,
someone here just said, Patty P said the APA, she brings that up. And this is something that, like, when I was studying ethics in my graduate program, we were looking at the ACA, the American Counseling
yes,
Association, and I'm reading this, and there this wokeness is in there. I mean, to use that word,
yes,
that's kind of a throwaway word right now, but this ideology is creeping into these ethics materials. And we see it
yes,
with the toxic masculinity statements of the
yes,
APA and the KCREP, which is the organization that accredits counseling programs. They also have cultural competency, which is a code word for this
yes.
specific stuff. So what I'm wondering is what is your perception of the whole licensed mental health profession? And do you see a way forward under sort of a parallel profession, like what I've been doing is coaching? I would love to see more solid evidence-based uh, education in the coaching sphere, taking things out of this mainstream accreditation process and offering really good skills to
Hmm.
sort of a parallel profession so that we
Hmm.
can get, and that's kind of something that my mind has been kicking around, like someone like you with your skills in teaching, if you were to teach some kind of a class for coaches, I don't
Yes,
know, do you see
yes,
where I'm going with this?
yes. I think that's definitely that's a good option for a path forward, because
Mhm.
I don't think you can undo. It's sort of like the putting the genie back in the bottle.
Right.
It's too pervasive to where even some of the textbooks that were written even by the original, kind of founders of psychology over the years, the big names, their textbooks alone have taken the concepts that were in there, and now they've added this diversity
Hmm.
component,
Hmm.
right? So they've taken even sort of source material and then reworked it to add in, the new updated book is the one that says culturally competent
Hmm.
family therapy, or whatever,
Right.
culturally all of that. And so I think you're right that it has to be a parallel kind of profession situation where you're able to, because I think it's too, I don't know how you undo where we are now. So the path forward, I think, is a parallel type of program, what be it coaching, be it something else, and probably, um, it, you're going to probably see more effects much more quickly in the coaching route anyway. There's a lot of accountability involved in
Hmm.
coaching. There's a lot of, okay, yes, this your path has sort of shaped this, let's move forward. And there's more of a direct moving
Hmm.
forward. And in general, probably is going to turn out some results that are going to be probably more effective, much more quickly, I think. Because I think the essence of psychotherapy has been too captured. And
Hmm.
I've
Hmm.
spoken about this to multiple groups in CTA, and a whole bunch of groups are doing some really wonderful things with this. And I hope they can turn it around in the UK, for
Hmm.
example, but I don't know about here. I haven't had any sense of way of understanding or thinking about this that can turn it around. And that's not just
Hmm.
from me, it's from
Hmm.
friends and colleagues who are still in the industry, what they're doing, how they see the world. They've also changed. Their kind of perception has also changed and been captured. So what's the answer? The answer is to create something else, or
Hmm.
to take something else that's there, like coaching, and redesign it or develop it, or in some way, create a bigger, you
Mhm.
know, a course or path or whatever, whatever comes out of that may be the only way to do
Mhm.
this,
Mhm.
because you can't eradicate that. Will not ever be done in our lifetime, in my opinion. I do not believe this will ever be eradicated out of psychology programs in my lifetime. I do not think. I think that's going to take a lot of time. It took a lot of time to
Mhm.
get here. It's going to take a lot of time to undo. So I
So
think
that's where you are with it right now in terms of the licensed profession. As it stands
that's,
right now, it's a train we can't turn around.
as it stands now, from my perspective, it is a train we can't turn around, because
Mhm.
the depth of it, it's not even just in psychology courses. You have people coming from different fields and that's what I had a lot at Antioch, right? Was I had a second and third career change students.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you
Mhm.
have people that also have already been doing something else for a long time, or they've gone to undergraduate school in one area and this and that. That's captured as well, and that's
Mhm.
been captured as well. So what you're getting in general, just people being drawn in, are bringing with them their
Mhm.
indoctrination. They're bringing with them all of these other ways of thinking that they've developed in other programs, taking other kinds of courses that have nothing to do with psychology at all. And
Mhm.
so they're shaping where we're going. They're
Mhm.
the ones who are kind of calling the shots in the next turn. So
Mhm.
I personally don't think there's a way out. I think there's a way that is different. It's a path that's going to be unlike what we've traditionally done, and it's going to
Mhm.
have to kind of be founded on principles that kind of negate all this, that rest and lie within the what how am I accountable for what I can do going forward. It is not okay that this happened to me, but I will not allow it to define my life. And
Mhm.
how do I then use that to go forward,
Mhm.
rather than use that to fight? And when you start using the words like fight,
Mhm.
which is in every, you know every kind of document, I mean, any kind of written communication by the school, or whatever, the word
Mhm.
fight,
Absolutely.
advocate,
Mhm.
okay, or add activism
Mhm.
turns
Mhm.
into fight, whatever, all those kinds of words do not belong in this field. And the fact is, they're so embedded in the field, I don't think there's a way out. People are now going to
Mhm.
psychology programs because they want to fight for people's rights. That was the
Yeah.
right answer on the admissions interview. And if
Yeah.
you look at the Antioch website, they've added now under admissions, you can either, write an essay about, there was one choice. I think the other choice is, what is social justice and how have I been a social justice, proponent, or whatever. How have I been? And I'm just going to say the word warrior. I don't think they use
Mhm.
that word, but
Mhm.
how have I, used that to move forward? Those are going to be the students that get in.
Mhm.
Those are going to be the students that are going to be your next crop of therapists, are going to be the ones who are wanting to be a warrior for rights. I want to save people. I want to help
Mhm.
people, and I want to fight.
Yeah.
So in and
That's
of itself, the
yeah.
aggressiveness of
Mhm.
that.
It's very it really stood out to me as being just antithetical to what my concept
Mhm,
of what you're doing with someone in
completely.
counseling is. And we were told that as well, that our main job, our first and foremost role as a counselor was an activist and an advocate for social
Yes.
change. And I thought,
Yes.
what in the world? What in the world
Yes.
is that? That does not sound like counseling to me at all.
It isn't. It isn't. And it was interesting because when we started with cultural competency,
Mhm.
that was a beautiful idea. It
Mhm.
was, I mean, I was an intern, I think, when I first heard that. And it was sort of, I remember telling my coworkers, what does that mean? How can we be competent on a culture? I think this is just, yeah, I didn't really understand what they were getting at. I thought it was stupid. It didn't make any sense. It just didn't make
Mhm.
any sense. I
Mhm.
don't know. But the way it was sort of, I guess, described was, being open to other people's ways of
Mhm.
thinking, and that not everybody thinks like you, et cetera,
Mhm.
and that you're going to have people from all walks of life. So we took this kind of great idea, which was learning to ask, to learn more about people, not make assumptions. They took it, and then it's been weaponized, in some fashion. It's been hijacked, I think,
Mhm.
the word I use, to kind of be the backbone, to be the foundation of a completely different kind of movement, a
Mhm.
completely different kind of political activism. They've sort of
Mhm.
taken that as the foundation. It sounds really good. The ideas were good, and they took that as a platform to
Mhm.
launch all of these different movements that have taken us away from actually caring about humanity and not making assumptions, doing the exact very, very, very
Yeah.
opposite, the exact very same thing, the antithesis, as you said,
Yeah.
of what our profession is supposed to be. So
It's
to
a
see the
gross oversimplification is what they
bingo,
said. Yeah.
100%,
Mhm.
and so as I was leaving, spent some time, thinking about, well, what am I going to do? I found a couple of organizations and, um, that wanted to kind of reshape how they did diversity training. That was really what what I started doing at FAIR was kind of the diversity training, how to reshape how they thought about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DE&I,
Mhm.
in the corporate world, because it's everywhere, in every industry now. And they were trying to reshape how they presented it. And how, let's if you have to take this diversity course kind of thing, how can we, teach this in a way that is actually meaningful and leads with pro-human? And that's kind of what
Mhm.
FAIR is based,
Mhm.
kind of their core principle is humanity, fairness, and I forgot
Mhm.
the third one, but it's basically leading from a shared humanity and
Mhm.
fairness point of view. And that's kind of what, and so that's what we were doing. It's important work. I will never get from it probably what I did from being a professor, because it just, that was just that's how I identified myself. So if I'm going to be, frank and honest,
Mhm.
my identity was wrapped around what I did for work. It was wrapped
Mhm.
around being a professor. So it wasn't just that I quit, it's that I left what I found
Mhm.
to be like my life mission, my path,
Yeah.
what made me Christine Sefein. I never had
Mhm.
children. I mean, I have a great partner, but I didn't have, I didn't go those other directions. Like, this
Mhm.
shaped a lot. And that was a big learning lesson for me, is how I'm going to shape my identity around like a profession. Like, this is what
Mhm.
happens when you do that. I
It's a
had a really
massive
hard,
sacrifice that you made.
huge, huge. And I never really found kind of my sea legs, after
Mhm.
that. That's what I was most proud of, of
Mhm.
doing. And, so I don't see another, I don't see another way. And so
Mhm.
I just, to me, the loss was immeasurable. And in some ways, I think when people speak out and lose their jobs over it, it gets a little bit dismissed.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I guess and again, and it's all about what matters, to you, where you create your sense of meaning. But for me, that was a massive sacrifice. It was a big,
Mhm.
big deal for me to do that
Mhm.
personally, because
Yeah.
of everything I had tied into it. But I just couldn't stand, and I didn't want to become resentful. I was starting to
Mhm.
become resentful of the students
Mhm.
and resentful of the school and resentful of the
Mhm.
field. And that to me was also, I wanted to leave while I still had some respect left for
Mhm.
what we're trying to do. And I will be honest that I don't know where I'm going to go with
Mhm.
all of this. It's been, a couple of years. I've done some things with FAIR, and then I went on medical leave again for my,
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
lot of health issues I've had. But other than that, it's like I don't know what that's going to look like going
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
It was not an easy thing for me to do, because it meant giving up not the school, not the profession. It meant giving up, I mean, the entire field in general, in any capacity, even as a clinical supervisor.
Yeah.
Now on those evaluations, you have to write whether or not, those trainees that you're supervising, the interns you're supervising, are they
Mhm.
practicing social justice, principles in their work. So no matter
Yeah.
what, it's just this
It's a part of
constant.
all of it.
Yes.
And you have, like, I mean, this is just like you said, this was your identity, this was your calling
Yes.
and your joy in life.
Yes.
And your convictions and your moral compass was more
Yes.
important to you even than
Yes.
that. And so you have
Yes.
it. It's incredible how it's funny. We're like in the 90s, we talked about peer pressure like it was this bad thing. There were all these like
Yes.
PSAs and
Don't do drugs, just say
yeah,
no to
kids of
peer
the
pressure.
90s know we heard about peer pressure
Oh yeah.
constantly. But now it's like these organizations, your schools are exerting peer pressure on you as hard as they possibly can, and everything is about,
Yes.
there's no acknowledgement that this is a potent force. And because of how potent this social force is, the the incredible fortitude it takes to be able to cut through that and say, no, this isn't right.
Yes.
I'm not going along with that. I don't care that it takes my career. I'm not
Yes.
going along with it. I mean, I have to commend you for that. It's incredible that you've been able to do what you've done. You had a career that a lot of people would die for. I mean, it was a fantastic thing
Yeah, it
that you
was.
had, and you stuck to your principles in spite of
I
that. And I think that's so noble and so impressive. So thank
thank
you for
you.
doing that.
Yes. No, thank you. I mean, that means a lot to just kind of have that be recognized. And I think the only thing I could think of afterwards was just when I had any opportunity to speak out. I mean, I've spoken at school boards and stuff, even without kids, about some of this stuff. And I think that's what I kind of have tried to do, is say, okay, well, what can I do um, to actively, if there's a way, a platform to actively, speak out, or to actively, to open people's eyes. And I guess that's my next mission. It's not nearly as gratifying as what I was doing, but it's the
Well,
next,
hopefully it's early days, and
you know.
maybe it can turn into something that'll be as gratifying.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I really do. I'm sure it will. I mean, I love these conversations. I love talking about this on podcasts. I've been
Mhm,
on a few before.
mhm,
That's been amazing. I thought about starting one myself. I haven't really gotten there,
mhm,
but that's been incredible. And that, I think, has helped me say, okay, well, this is now my next,
mhm.
mission, but I haven't
To
laid
talk about
fully
it.
fleshed. Yeah.
Mhm,
Because, again, too, it's not that anybody in the school came into the classroom or said anything to me officially, but we talked about it a little bit last week, but the emails that were coming into the
mhm,
faculty, like the people that were the full-time faculty, who kind of had the insider's look, into what was going on.
mhm,
That's just what was coming next. And then when I heard about what they were having the students sign,
mhm.
that's not something that was happening even in
That was
2021 when I
Yeah,
left.
that was
That's
new.
new.
It started in, I think, 2021. So for
I
me
missed it.
anyway. Yeah.
Right, I left after the first quarter of that year. So
Yeah.
that's,
And that's not even in every class, I think. So
it
yeah,
yeah,
we're seeing it creep in, but
yep, yep,
um yeah, so much change. And I
yeah,
again, I know we have to wrap up, but this conversation just flew by, and I would
it
love
always
to,
do.
maybe we can do this again,
Yes,
and
I love to.
keep the dialogue, because it's
Absolutely,
really important.
especially if people have questions and things, that they
Yeah.
wanna talk about, or topics or something to kinda jump in.
I wanted to
I'm
pay more
happy.
attention to the chat today, and I feel like
Yes,
we kind of flew by, and I wish I could go through, but I know we have kind of a hard out here. One thing I did see, and I just have to
yes.
shout out to this, is Oceana 23 quotes one of my favorite poems here. It's The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats. And the quote here: "The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity."
Ah,
And
wow,
that is something I
I
would
love that.
urge everybody to go out and read that poem. I'd almost recite it here if I thought I could remember the whole thing. But
Right?
it's a good one to revisit right now, because
Absolutely.
yeah.
That's what it's become, I think, right now in the world. It's this sort of that, and people calling it a spiritual battle. Maybe it is, but it is coming down to, I think, us being forced to make a choice
Mhm.
as to what matters more to us. We're really having to choose. I mean, there's no in between, there's no gray, there's no I'll just stay out of the conversation. We're past that. Now we have to make a choice on what we believe in and what we want to align with, and what we don't, in so many areas. And that's, I think, also, I don't think I've experienced that in my lifetime living in the United States, being born here, that's ever really been where I've had to actually, and seen that we have to do that as communities now. We have to
Yeah.
actually take a stand,
Yeah.
so it's all, remains to be seen where we end up. But I do believe good will come out of talking about it and speaking out about it.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know what will happen in the future. Maybe more change will happen than what I'm foreseeing, but I think
Well,
this is where it starts.
I think that the more we can have these kind of conversations, I think that um, there is something noble in being able to stand by your principles and your convictions. And I think that people recognize that and want to strive towards that. I think that's always been a core um, value that has been seen as admirable. And we need, maybe through these conversations, more people who are sitting on the fence
Yes.
will
Yes.
feel emboldened to go ahead and take
Yes.
that step and say, I do have things that I could lose by doing this, but I will gain something also. And
Yes.
it's that
Yes.
that sense of alignment with your own values and with your own goals. And it's worth quite a lot
Absolutely.
to be able
Yes,
to do that.
it is. And I thank you so much, Leslie, for inviting me and for also speaking out. And I think it was so serendipitous and just totally meant to be the stars aligned that we were
Mhm.
able to connect,
Yeah.
especially from both, both being from the school, that same
Mhm.
school. And so it's to me just been such an honor. And
Yeah.
thank you for wanting to hear my story and what
Thank
happened with me.
you. Yes.
I,
Yeah.
I, I really do feel very honored and humbled by that. So you're doing such amazing work, and so many people are contacting me about you. So you're getting out there, and that's pretty
Awesome.
amazing.
Well, I'm glad if any of these conversations can help other people, I think
Yeah, absolutely,
that's where it's at. And thank you. And I hope we
absolutely.
do this again soon.
Yes, we will. Sounds
Okay.
good. Okay,
Okay.
talk to you soon.
All
Take care.
righty.
Bye bye.
Bye.